Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week on the podcast is part 2 of a discussion on yoga and neurodiversity with Thea Wildcroft, Becky Atten, and Jess Glennie. So if you want to start this conversation from the very beginning, go ahead and listen to last week's episode first and then catch up with us here. This week we're discussing quite a bit more about the concrete things that we can consider when we build or revamp our spaces. Jess, Becky, and Theo all talk about the things we can do when we consider neurodivergent humans taking yoga classes. These are really great and concrete examples of how we shift our thinking and our lighting in order to create some more welcoming spaces for all human beings. Of course, before we begin, there's a couple things I want to tell you about this week. First, I've decided to completely revamp my sponsorship system for the podcast to make it more accessible, financially accessible specifically, not only to big brands, but also smaller businesses that are looking to get their products and services out there to other yoga folks. I'm now offering individuals, retreat centers, and small brands who are part of the Working in Yoga ecosystem the opportunity to snag what I'm calling community sponsorships. Community sponsorships are a limited, non-exclusive way to support the podcast while reaching yoga professionals to let them know about your business. And what's super fun for me is that I get to shout out your cool work on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to it. So if you're curious about sponsoring an episode or two, you'll find details linked in the show notes under sponsorship opportunities. And as a reminder, I have a quieter behind-the-scenes co-working space for us called The Back Room. It's where yoga and wellness pros can take these public conversations like we have on the podcast or on social media and actually think through what they mean for their own work and businesses. You can learn more about that in the show notes or at thesunlightexperience.com/backroom. Now, here is part 2 of my conversation about yoga and neurodivergent folks with Thea Wildcroft, Jess Glennie, and Becky Atten. Okay, so here's my question. So I just have to say this. Sometimes, Thea, when you're talking, I hate that you're in my head. Like I have in my head a list of things I want to talk about. I'm like, damn it, she's already there. But one of the things that I think we can do skillfully in the yoga space, partially because yoga studios particularly are just big empty rooms, right? So we have a lot of opportunity to shift and change the environment within a big empty space. My question to you all is, what does it look like if we build yoga spaces with neurodivergent people in mind from the jump, in the way that we can build yoga spaces that are multicultural and multi-ethnic and like embracing all kinds of humans? Like, what does that look like? Like, is it putting lights on dimmers? Like immediately this conversation, I was like, obviously we all just need dimmers, right? So that you can
dimmer one. Dimmer
like,
and
how does that look?
Small sparks. I think it's a wish list thing. I mean, people are very different. For me,
Tell us.
I want soft spaces, and I want spaces that have been acoustically assessed properly and audio damping. I'm married to someone who's so autistic, he doesn't understand why anybody would want a diagnosis. And one of the things that really, really gets to him is badly designed acoustics in spaces. And there was a yoga studio I was working at once, and he went in and he spent like an afternoon looking at it, and he was asked to do this. And then he said, okay, I think 3 fabric panels on these 3 walls, and then some loft insulation on the top of that cupboard there. And he transformed transformed the acoustics of the space for like £40.
Yeah, that is so. I mean, there are so many spaces that I'm effectively excluded from because any kind of sound engine. I mean, I don't think small businesses even think about sound engineering. I mean,
No,
cafes are a case in point, like there's no sort of
Jesus.
anything in there.
Yeah.
So there's hardly any cafe I can sit in because, at least in a yoga studio, you've usually got some bolsters and stuff that absorb it a bit.
Mm.
But yeah, I think the sound engineering is really important.
And the dimmers, Becky.
Yeah.
More moss.
A moss covered studio would be ideal for lots of reasons.
Tactile.
Yes, that, the color, the texture, the smell. But maybe not for everybody. I so I lean a lot on universal design principles when I am offering any kind of like in-person workshop. Even a lot of times I go to spaces that aren't designed to be, they're not yoga studios, they're community spaces. And I do my best to remove as much stimulation as I can and then create really intentional ways for people to add stimulation who need it that isn't going to interfere with the experiences of other people in the room. So, having some low volume ambient music in the background that might help dampen like the noise of like the airflow coming into the room, which is a big issue for me personally, or like buzzing lights, that kind of thing. So I need that like background music, and I find that's true for a lot of people. And then having like I always bring like a pile of like fidgets and things that people can touch and hold and play with their hands. So that's one way to add stimulation. There's lots of ways, but just to give a couple examples. So I start kind of with a clean slate and then find ways for people to add to it if they need more stimulation than what the space is offering.
I'd also advise, and this is a tricky one to make happen, but I think it's really important, is you need to get neurodivergent people helping you design your spaces. Like, it's because I mean, there is a lot of divergence between us. Like, that we're not all the same, but at the same time, I know that your average neurodivergent person will walk into a space and immediately know what's wrong in a way that neurotypical people will not necessarily pick up on. So they'll be, and I used to do this before I was even diagnosed. I look back now and I laugh when I'd go into kind of respite centers and institutional spaces to work with profoundly disabled children and young people. And one of the things that I used to do without even thinking about it is, as I walked through the space, I'd be turning off screens and radios as I walked through, because what staff would do is they'd go into a room, they'd turn on radio or TV in theory to entertain the children, and then they'd leave it on, and then they'd move into the next room and they'd be the same. And I'm walking from space to space with just one input after another, and I would just walk through them turning them off, right? And I didn't even realize I was doing that for like years. And then I'd leave after my sessions and the care workers in the space would be like, oh, it feels really calm in here. And I'd say, well, yeah, because I turned all the screens off that you had on when I walked in. Like, so, and it is part of a bigger principle within disability activism, which is nothing about us without us. So if you're not including disabled people more generally, and specifically in this case, neurodivergent people in your planning, then how do you expect to get it right? Just because you've taken a course on it. Like, that's what the courses should be teaching people.
I agree. And okay, so I'm going to say this. I've built many businesses over my life, one including a yoga studio, and I'm also building now a completely digital business. And I will just say this is frankly good business. So good, bad, or otherwise. Like, one of the things that happened when I built my studio was I was obsessive about the experience, right? Like, what were the lights? Like, what do you see? What do you hear? What can you touch? What can you smell? What can you taste? Like, I just went into my business and I was like, what is that like? And then I was lucky enough to have a team of people who could come in, who could tell me what their experiences were like in that space, right? And it
Yeah.
is exactly that's just good business, y'all. This is just smart stuff to do. Go ask
Yeah.
people if they like your stuff. And here's something that I think we haven't highlighted on the podcast, but I've thought in my head at least 4 times. Don't take it personally. If somebody checks you on the nuance of language or somebody says, "Hey, your lights are really bright." This isn't a personal attack on you as a human being. You're still a good person. You still love your family. It's just something you can do to be better. And I really want to encourage people, especially neurotypical people who might be listening to this. This isn't an affront on who you are as a person. When your quote unquote difficult student comes in the room and says, "I need this," it's just something you can do to be better. We should be wanting to do this, friends. Like,
We should, and yeah, I'm sure I'm going to guess that a universal experience on this call is people not taking that information well. Because a really common autistic experience in particular is offering information in a clear, kind of consistent way
sure,
and being misunderstood as to what, well, you're trying to, no, I'm not trying to do anything. I'm not playing
sure.
games. I wouldn't even know what the games are. And like, I'm just giving you information. Right? That is what I'm trying to do. You have asked for feedback and I've given you feedback.
And
Right?
also giving very precise
Mm.
information
Yeah.
and having a
Yes.
very woolly response to it that doesn't really, no, I didn't
Yeah.
say put it over there. I said put it in that corner there, about an inch away from the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. We are specific people.
Mm. I think
Quite
though
often.
I want to encourage anybody who's listening who might want to consider adding more neurodiverse friendly experiences into their space. And hard check me if
Yeah.
I said that incorrectly. But what I want to encourage people to get it wrong so that we can get it right. If I get it wrong, if I put the thing, like you said, 2 inches away from the wall, and I'm like, "Hey, is this good?" And you say, "No, that's too far away." Like, get it wrong so you can get it right. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. We can take feedback. I think, especially in the yoga space, it's difficult for a lot of us to take feedback. We can circle that back to the like trauma sort of
Mm.
situation. It's very hard for trauma survivors to take feedback a lot of the time. But I think we can do it. Like, I have faith in us. You know what I mean? like,
But
like,
I think it also has to do with the power dynamics of being a yoga teacher and some of
Yeah.
the stuff that gets um, projected onto yoga teachers, and also that yoga
Mm.
teachers kind of I don't know, adopt as, especially newer yoga teachers who might be very shiny and very, kind of impressed by their new title. And and if you're feeling in that way, then somebody saying, like, hey, could you maybe move that over there a few
Mm.
inches, can be received as challenging.
yeah.
And it's a
Yeah.
sort of a paradigm, an old-fashioned kind of paradigm where the teacher is always right and the teacher is correcting you, the lowly student, and you just receive this information from them.
Well, I want to try to remember where I had a couple things I wanted to respond to that we were talking about it. This helps everybody, right? When we
Yeah.
are listening to people who are different, believing them, and then making shifts, whether environmental or to cues or approach based on that feedback. So when I talk about neurodiversity affirming as an approach to how we present or teach yoga, I really do mean neurodiversity as in all of us, everybody, because again, like as we said earlier, so many neurodivergent folks discover this later in life.
Yeah.
We might go, I work with folks who are just finding out they're autistic in their 60s. So,
Yeah.
so some of the yoga teachers who are maybe not being having difficulty receiving that feedback and responding to it could be neurodivergent themselves, and some forms of neurodivergence there's just like flavors that clash. So, but in my experience I think and maybe I'm privileged in this way, most of the folks that I have met along the way, um, who have offered me feedback and have been very gracious about it. And I try to extend that to others in the same way because I think that's the only way we can make that space for us to learn together, and collaborate together is if we know that we're going to give one another grace because we are going to get it wrong probably many times.
Yeah.
Um, and so I try to, as much as possible, if I am the one giving that feedback, um, try to do it in such a way that it's more of, I'm informing you of this need that I have, um, and here's a suggestion of what you can do about it. And it's also not your fault.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I want to shift this last bit of the conversation in is that how are we going to impart this wisdom on people without trying to sell them a 30-hour course for somewhere between $295 and $1,095 so that they can feel empowered and informed to make shifts to support neurodiverse individuals in their spaces? Because I think that's like I'm real tired of, in my head I call it the snake eating the tail, right? We find another thing that we can sell the same like 2,000 yoga units on, and we're just look, another training. And that's how we're all making our livings. Let's like nip that in the bud. How do we do that? Nobody needs, do we need a 30-hour course on this?
I, and
Do we
there
need
are
dimmer
like
switches?
yes. Are there things that I wish yoga teachers knew about neurodivergence? Yes. Does it need to be a 30-hour training? Possibly not. I mean, I've done it in kind of, a day workshop or a kind of one of these kind of overnight, kind of like 2 sessions and like 3 sessions kind of things. I think you can do it in like 8 to 10 hours easy. But I think it's more a question of what do you want in those trainings. Personally, I am less interested in, frankly, scientifically dodgy ideas about how nervous systems work. I'm more interested in things like, is the training being delivered by someone who's neurodivergent, actually has lived experience? I think that actually, unfortunately, there's enough snake oil in the system already that starts to become really important. Are you being taught about see, I'm much more interested in people who are being taught about the social model of disability, the history of eugenics, why this is important, the kind of struggle for humanity, the history of the idea of normal. That's the stuff that I want, not like here's a way to reset your nervous system through square breathing. Like, no, right? So it's much more about that kind of thing. For me. And I think that maybe is one of the differences between that and trauma-informed. I think if someone's taken a really good trauma-informed training, they're already halfway there, right? If they take that and then they understand some of the kind of more up-to-date contemporary theories around monotropism, for example, which I think is fantastic work, really interesting things. And also some of the stuff about co-emerging conditions is really important. So a lot of people don't realize that kind of stuff. So things on co-emergent conditions are important, and things on medical trauma specifically. So I think that increasingly the rates of medical and therapeutic trauma, as in trauma from encounters with medical and therapeutic professionals, are quite possibly astronomically high amongst neurodivergent people. And I think that needs to be taken into account when you're in a setting where most yoga teachers model for behaving ethically is to be another kind of a therapist.
Yeah. Ooh, I really love that conversation. Anyone else want to say anything? I'm not going to rant, but I have I have thoughts about it.
Yeah,
I
I mean, yeah, go on, Becky.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the last statistic I saw was something like 85% of neurodivergent folks, and I'm not sure exactly how that was in this stat, how that was being defined, but have some level of complex trauma related to those social factors that Theo was referencing. So it's kind of like the trauma-informed world and the neurodivergent friendly world are enmeshed necessarily because of that. Yeah, and just my 2 cents is like, I think trainings are helpful. I think because it gives you a way to explore perspectives that you might not otherwise have access to. So lived experience 100% needs to be centered. Um, and it also comes down to, I think, just personal work. If we are actually practicing yoga, practicing ahimsa, we're living by all those values, this is necessarily, I think, just organically, we're going to be, quote, neurodiversity affirming because we're seeing the divine in one another and we're not, mentally creating a hierarchy of neurotypical is better than neurodivergent. But that takes all of that internalized ableism work. We have to work to dispel all of that. So um, I'm just going to ramble, so I'm going to stop there. But
Yeah, and I think there's something about there's an approach to yoga teacher training that is about postures. It's about learning these postures and learning the correct anatomy for these postures and being able to do these postures and then being able to do these even more difficult postures. And that's a particular version of yoga which is very popular out there in the world and is probably the dominant version of what yoga is out there in the world. And for me, if people are doing what Becky's suggesting, then yeah, that's great, and that is going to make us more open to listening and questioning what we're bringing to the situation. But I think it's for those people who are in that other paradigm that there's some input needed, along the lines of, well, what is your role as a yoga teacher? What are you actually there for? How are you able to make your space feel safe for students to come up and talk to you about anything that might not be working, not just neurodivergent people, but, something that isn't quite right for them in the room, and that you're going to be able to listen to it and take it on board, like as you were saying, Rebecca, not as this is a criticism of you, not from an egoic place, but from, oh, this is just something that maybe we could take on and this will make the space better for everybody.
I think yoga. So I want to shift the conversation, not shift the conversation, but extend the possibility that actually we as an industry, we're pretty good at this. Like we've done trauma-informed training, and I've gone into traditional medical settings. And just to say, like I went into the last time I went to visit my women's doctor, my gynecologist, I was triggered and had my nervous system shut down. And there was probably 75 people on staff at the place I went to, and not a one person had any training in trauma information of any kind. And by the time I was able to, because my nervous system hits freeze pretty quickly, and so by the time I was able to get out of it and advocate and say, hey, I need ice packs because ice packs on my wrist are what gets me out of this, they were like, what happened? So I have enough language to say, hey, so I have a CPTSD diagnosis. Sometimes this thing happens in my head. I got trapped and I couldn't say what I needed. And then, it all spiraled down from there. And this woman who spent 14 years for her medical degree was like, we have one lady on our entire staff who has any sort of training whatsoever in trauma informed of any kind. And I thought, damn, yoga blows this out of the water, and you all really would be running into this based on your job. I think we can do that again in yoga with supporting neurodiverse folks. Like we've already done this in the past. Like I'm quite excited about it. Like, y'all, we could have these discussions. Write books, everyone.
We can, but it needs to be done right, and it needs to not be the same people like making money off us. Right. There's this thing that happens where, I mean, we all kind of cringed when Bessel van der Kolk's name was mentioned earlier. Like what happens is you get these kind of, prominent figures who are able to essentially extract lived experience from a particular population and then synthesize it, systematize it, and sell it back out as a universal response to kind of to looking after those populations. And it actually worsens the provision for those folks. and does so in a way that is extractive of the kind of wisdom traditions that they're already a part of, right? And that's my concern. Like you say, it's not whether or not we need another 20-hour, 30-hour training, it's who's running it. What are they saying? What are the competencies people are coming out with? Because in my experience, I love that we've done the trauma-informed thing in yoga, but I do know that since trauma-informed yoga has become a thing, more trauma survivors have come to me saying, I was triggered in a yoga class than ever before. And they're being triggered by people who've done trauma-informed trainings, because those people have said, I was told by my trainer that survivors need this. And they're not listening to the lived experience in front of them. So there is this lottery. I talk about this a lot, this lottery of harm and healing that happens in yoga spaces. And I worry that if we're not careful, what we'll do with a new rash of trainings coming through is we'll just raise the stakes of that harm and healing even more, right? So we'll have spaces that are fantastically good and have spaces that are incredibly bad, right? And I'm not sure that my nervous system can take it. Like I don't go to yoga classes, I don't go to yoga workshops, I don't go into yoga spaces. I'm in a position at the moment where, thanks to kind of a number of kind of perimenopausal issues and things like that, my nervous system is chronically dysregulated at the moment, right? I am not getting much help from the NHS. I was prescribed 3 asthma inhalers, one after the other, that I was allergic to. 3. And I was talking to the pharmacist about this because they ring you up after you've been on it for a week and they're like, how's it going? And the pharmacist rings me up with the 3rd one and he's like, how's the inhaler going? And I said, this is my 3rd asthma inhaler I've been allergic to in a row in 3 weeks. And he started to say, that's not possible. And then he went, hang on a minute, tell me more. And I explained to him and he said, oh, I think you're hypermetabolic. And this is a term that I had never been introduced to before, which is apparently really common for autistic folks to be essentially, it's not just a hypersensitivity to medication, it's the fact that you metabolize it too fast, which means that you have much more of a chance of side effects and much more of a chance of all these kind of things. Now, I'm in the middle at the moment of trying to get the courage up to go back to the doctor, knowing that the GP is just going to go, let's try something else. I don't need you to try something else that's going to mess with my nervous system and crash me again for another 2 weeks, right? I'm in the same situation with yoga. People are like, well, have you tried this? Like, I have an autoimmune condition. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? I don't know whether any one of those things is going to make me ill for 2-3 weeks at long, right? So I just don't have the capacity at this point in my life to take that lottery, to take that chance. That's the problem.
How do we make more skillful decisions because we're at the forefront of this conversation, right? I did some research, like I said before we hit record, I did some research about who was talking about neurodiversity in yoga, and it's Becky. Becky is like the first 4 pages of Google. So Holly, like your SEO game also amazing. And I'm going like, how do we have this conversation and start it in a better way? How can we improve? Like, let's learn from the trauma-informed people.
The problem is for me that it's a radical change in pedagogy, right? It's a pedagogy that starts from inquiry, not just on the part of the student, but on the part of the teacher. So that if a student comes to you and says, I'm having this issue with my breathing, for example, that you actually are able to ask the kind of questions that will help get the student to a place where your first priority is integrating and making them safe and stable first, right? Not transforming their situation, making them safe first. That's the first thing we do. And then we actually make informed decisions about what might or might not help. There's a fantastic friend of mine, like one of my best friends in the world, who's also kind of very much undiagnosed at the moment, neurodivergent, and he's a mathematician by training. And he said the phrase that really annoys him in therapeutic settings more than anything else is trial and error. He says, because you're not supposed to practice trial and error, you're supposed to practice trial and improvement. And too often what we practice is trial and error. We're like, let's throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks. No. Let's start from what we know about the individual in front of us, start small, and check with the individual whether it's helping or not, and adjust accordingly as we go. And that's not happening. Have you tried X? Have you tried Y? Like, no.
And also the have you tried X, have you tried Y is usually based on something that they read on social media about
Oh
X.
God, yeah.
And
Yeah,
X is
it
really
is.
good for that. So, you know,
Yeah.
and the if the person is autistic, they've probably already researched the research about
Yeah.
X and know more about it, you know, than some experts in the field of X.
Yeah. Like I'm working at the moment with a fantastic medical, she's a licensed medical herbalist. Highly recommend neurodivergent folks out there. This is new to me as a kind of modality. Phenomenal tool to work with if you've got a sensitive nervous system. Because the difference with working with her is that I can try one drop of something, literally one drop. So she will send me, I mean, for those of you who like can see my screen on audio, you can't, but for those of you who can, you can see the bottles behind me. That is all the different tinctures that I have. And I start with one drop a day and see how I feel.
You
And
see,
then I'm
this is
building up to a medical dose.
and that really reminds me of how we work therapeutically with trauma because we
Yeah,
titrate it, right? We
we
don't go,
titrate.
yeah, we go, you know, let's do a tiny bit of this and just see how that is for your system and how it
Mm,
responds. And then
mm,
we're going to modify it depending on how
mm,
you respond. But I mean, for the in the average yoga class setting, like in a gym or in a yoga studio where the
mm,
teacher's standing up front and there are 20 or maybe 40 even people in there,
mm.
that is so foreign to what's going on in that setting.
But then I think we have to come back to the same principles, right? Which is about making it radically okay for people to sit stuff out, for people to adapt things, for people to listen to their bodies, right? So, if you're doing that, everyone's jumping up and down at the same time thing. And we can kind of any style of yoga, including things like Ashtanga and so on. Like there are ways of teaching it in which everyone's doing the same thing, and there are ways of doing it in which people are allowed to actually listen to their body, and not just allowed but encouraged. Like for me, that's the skill we should be teaching people, right? Is to know when something's wrong and stop.
And yeah, and I think it's kind of separating out like the yoga therapy world from the yoga teacher world. Yoga teachers don't like, there's no necessity for us to make assumptions about whether or not somebody wants something fixed or treated.
Yes.
People who come to yoga classes, in my experience, more often than not, are seeking like community, that sense of parallel play of being with other people, but not
Mm,
having to directly interact, not having that social pressure.
mm,
And then, for my personal practice, remembering the whole goal of yoga is to find that connection in myself, to my true self, my spirit, and not just as I am, and not having to like wonder if I'm making progress, or if this next new technique is going to address a challenge that I had in the last technique. I think that's for the folks who have the yoga therapy background and people who seek that out, like, then that's great. But don't assume somebody wants that when they are struggling with an
yeah.
issue. And letting people explore is a really great way, I think, for people to figure that out for themselves without the teacher feeling that pressure or responsibility of having to come up with a solution for a problem that
It's
might not be
I
fixed.
would I would actually love it if yoga teachers learned more about neurodivergent culture rather than neurodivergent medicine. I think more than anything else. I think that's what I want. Like I want yoga teachers to know what stimming is, what parallel play is, what pebbling is, what special interests are. Like these are the things that I want yoga teachers to know, right? Learn what our culture is and how we are with each other and how we hang out and that's what's going to make, if you really want to make a space neurodivergent friendly, like have a cool bowl of rocks in the room, like and know why that's important, right?
Have a wall of moss.
And more
And
and more
also,
like
also double empathy because, you know,
yeah,
then that gives a framework
yeah,
for like, why might we not be understanding each other quite right here? And how can we
mm,
maybe adjust a bit so that we're coming to a better understanding of each other across neurotypes?
mm. Yeah, double empathy is a hard one when yoga teachers are taught that they read other people. Like it's one of the skills apparently that yoga
Mm,
teachers are supposed to
mm,
have, right? Is the
mm,
ability to read other people's experience. And that can be really hard, I think, for some yoga teachers to hear that maybe they can't do that with everyone
mm,
and they need
mm.
to ask questions.
And it's also not
Yeah.
healthy for us to do it for everyone. I mean, again, speaking as a person, like I know the reason why we read everybody is because so many of us have trauma in our past,
Yeah.
and that kept us safe, especially in childhood or young adulthood. Like that's just not healthy. For like we've built this industry around people who are real good at reading a room because we had to do that to be safe. And now I think what I like about this conversation is that we do need to train people how to teach differently than we did. The pedagogy, as you said, like how we're teaching people how to teach needs to be different because it's not about you as a teacher. It's about the experience of the humans in the room and how can you be better at facilitating a better experience for them. And that's true universally, not just with neurodivergent folks, but we should be committed to being better for everybody who comes through our room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The end. Tell everybody how to find y'all.
I mean, I'm the only, I usually say this, I'm the only Theo Wildcroft on the planet, so I'm quite easy to find. Like literally, honestly, like
Just
you
Google
Google
her.
me, you can find me. But you'll find me on places you will find me on Instagram, on Facebook still, and on Substack more than anything else.
Jess.
So I am Embody Yoga Dance in most places on Facebook and Instagram. I don't post loads of stuff in places. I also have a blog, and if you go to my website, which is embodyyogadance.co.uk, you can find links to it there.
And the
Becky.
books, and the books. The books
And
are
the
good.
And
books.
the books. Yeah, so yeah, thank you. So I have three books. One is Hypermobility on the Yoga Mat, which is, I mean, we haven't really talked much about the intersection between hypermobility and neurodivergence, but there is one. So that book is relevant. The Yoga Teacher Mentor actually very relevant to changing pedagogy. And Raveled Up is about my experience of being an autistic person in movement, yoga, dance spaces. So yeah, there are links to where you can get all of those on my book, but they're all sort of available in the usual places.
And apparently, all you need to do is Google yoga for neurodiversity
It's true.
and find me. But my website is yogaforneurodiversity.com, and I'm on Instagram, yoga underscore for underscore neurodiversity. If you want to friend me or seek out offerings. So I haven't written any books. Um,
Yet.
Yet. I
thanks.
was just going to say
Yet.
that too.
Send Moss.
Yeah, I think I have more
Anything
work
else?
to do before I get to that point.
Is there anything else that you all want to add before we wrap up? You can say no, but I wanted to give the opportunity.
I would love us to share a moment of kind of neurodivergent joy and ask what's your favorite special interest encounter right now? Jess.
My favorite special interest right now is ballet, doing it and watching it, but especially doing it. And my sort of neurodivergent joy moment would be in a ballet class. Yeah.
Nice. Becky.
And I know I just said I don't have any books, but I'm for fun writing a sci-fi novel right now that is incorporating some of my special interest, in particular quantum physics, and the theory of quantum gravity or loop quantum gravity is one that I'm enamored with at the moment. And so I've developed a world around some of that, and that brings me a lot of joy.
And I'm still obsessed with the herbs at the moment, have been for the kind of last 2 years. I've been and I'm just about to start working with sweet violet and see how that works for me. But I've been very excited working with ephedra, which is one of the naughty herbs, because you have to have a license to have it because it's technically a stimulant, but not in the doses that I'm having it. But I managed to find, I went to Korea on a conference recently and set off across the city to try a traditional medicine market and track down a practitioner who just gave me a handful of ephedra, bless him, because I wanted so little of the actual herb. He asked me lots of interesting questions about, like, do you know what you're using it for? Is anyone helping you with this? Like, why do you want this herb, strange white woman? And then offered to tell me an implausible amount of ephedra. And I said, no, I just want a handful of it. So I've just made my first ephedra tincture, which is making me very happy now. So.
This is the best. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for trusting me with this conversation. I'm just delighted and delighted by you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all so much for this conversation. Oh my gosh, I just am obsessed with you all. This is just such a thrill. A couple things I am for sure going to be thinking about from this episode, probably well into the future, are first, how some of the ideas that Jess, Becky, and Theo shared might change the way that I'm thinking about my classes and workshops. And also, and I've said this so many times in the podcast over the years, but I'm obsessed with how people experience the things that I build. So let me ask you this. What parts of the things that you build for the world are you most attentive to or curious about how people experience? What do your clients and students love about the things that you're building? Okay, so next week is the final Theo and Friends episode, and Becky and Theo are back to talk all about neuroqueering. Things are going to get weird, y'all, in the best way. If you have the chance, if you'll do me a favor and like, subscribe, or follow the podcast from wherever you're listening, that gives the algorithm a signal that they should show this podcast to other people. And let's go get to work. I'm grateful you're here, and I will catch you around the water cooler next time.